A sense of community. That is what my guest, Rob Harvey, is developing when providing social skills groups by using theater and Dungeons and Dragons. I met Rob at the National Autism Conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, when I was presenting earlier this year. And I loved his energy. He is providing social language skills groups that are cooperative, that are fun. He said, lead with joy. I knew that I liked him when he said that. Lead with joy. Yes, 100%. Yes, we're going to share some really cool ways that you can use outside of the box thinking to work on social language skills. This is a really informative episode. If you have an idea about a really cool activity that you want to try with your learners, but maybe you're feeling a little intimidated because it's a little different, it's outside of the box, it's not exactly rote, my turn, your turn, cooperative learning. In that way, it's a little different. This episode will inspire you on how to get started. I can't wait for you to tune in to this episode with Rob Harvey.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the show today. We have a great episode. We have with us Rob Harvey. Thank you so much, Rob, for coming on to the show.
I'm very excited to be here, Rose. Thank you so much for having me.
And I was telling Rob I had to do some sleuthing to find out who he was. I was presenting at the NAC conference in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in August. It was just really such a highlight of my career, really. It's cool to be invited to speak at that. And you were, I think I asked for a volunteer or something during my talk, and you answered a question or something and then came up and talked to me. And I was like, who is this guy? He's very friendly, had a very smart answer when I asked a question. But I sleuthed you. And so now you're on the show. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. Yeah. I'm excited about this topic today. And we're going to talk about, if you've been listening to my content, I talk about leisure skills, modified leisure skills. I think that I always try to just mirror therapy to like what happens in like the natural environment in real life. So you have a kind of a riff on what I do with modified leisure, which I'm excited to talk about because we've never talked about this topic. So I'm excited to get into it. But tell us, I do ask people, how they got into the field. I don't know your answer at all. And it's always interesting for me. I know you've been on Behavioral Observations with my friend Matt Sikoria. And I don't know why. It's like, I do like reality TV. So maybe that's why I like that first question that he asked. It's like, how did you get in the field? And everybody's answer is just a little bit different. And I love to find out. So how did you get started in the field, Rob? Tell us.
Yeah, I love this question too. It is often different. So I totally by accident, I was a theater major when I entered college, which has served me really well. I still use those skills constantly. But the girl I was dating at the time did not like the idea of me having romantic scenes with other girls. And so, I cast off all my dreams at that point and threw in the towel. And I was like, okay, what will I do instead? And I was like, I had this child psych class. And I said, well, that's really interesting. I really like that. So let's do a little bit more of that. So I graduated as a psych major and had no idea what I was going to do. And my best friend's mom hooked me up with a job as a therapeutic staff support, which was PA's version of a behavior tech at that time. Mm-hmm. And that was just kind of where the next 21 years of my life kind of started. And throughout that process, working kind of one-on-one, I also ended up running social skills groups because my mentor, who became my BCBA mentor, she wanted someone who was young and cool, which at that time
obviously you.
Right. I was in a band, that was my other dream that, obviously didn't come true. But so she had me run these groups and I just fell in love with running social skills groups for autistic individuals. So that was that was kind of where I got my beginnings, my origin story.
I do think that's interesting because you may not, probably don't know this about me, but I used to play the harp. So in fourth grade, I joined our Akron Public School harp ensemble. And my parents were kind enough that they actually purchased me a harp when I turned 21. And I played gigs for 20 years. And I stopped because I have three kids and I own a small business. And they want to ask you, like, so in 12 months on a Saturday at 7 p.m., what are you doing? And it's like, well, I'm probably busy. But
Yep.
I did, what's interesting to me is how many people I've had, even just on the show, who have been in a band or are a musician or have some kind of side gig or passion that is musical. And I feel like I definitely have used all of those skills in therapy. Like it does transfer. And I think music is so important, and you probably in some way utilize that, in your therapy sessions, and it really is a way to bond and connect without having to like talk to people too. You're just kind of in the same space enjoying music. So I think that music is I just think music is so important. I posted this Instagram reel. I'm trying to grow my Instagram account, and it was this girl singing "You Are My Sunshine," and it was just like, this is your reminder that you should be using music in therapy. And it's like had 6 million views. And I think it's just because it's not because it's something cool that I put on there. I think it just connects people. Music just, connects people. So
It's performative too,
yeah.
so I mean, the stuff you talk about in your podcast and your trainings, just this idea of kind of being able to be fun and silly with
Mhm.
kids is
Yeah.
very hard for a lot of adults to kind
Mhm.
of get past that. And that was my background. Was we did a lot of children's theater, and so singing and performing and dancing and just
Mhm.
doing anything to make kids laugh has
Mhm.
has just served me every day, with the kids I work with, the adults I work with, the staff that I work with. It's across the board.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I never thought about that, but I definitely wasn't the same kind of therapist. When I first started, I didn't have my own kids. I I do want to say I'm very type A. I wasn't like silly like that. I remember a mom of a 3-year-old saying, "Well, your personalities just don't mesh." And I was
No.
like, very offended. I'm sure I wept over that, but I definitely am a different person now. I think it's because for me, it was like, I have my own kids. I have an online business. So I am making these. I mean, I have a whole TikTok channel. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, I've done some silly stuff if you just Google Rose Griffin. But I think I just got over that. And it does make therapy seem so different when you're just kind of out there and you're not afraid to be silly to, or whatever it is your client needs to engage in that moment. So I like that you bring that up because I've never really thought about it that way. But you're right. Some people are really uncomfortable with the idea of doing things that are might be seem silly if
Yeah,
but it's like there's a reason behind the
there
silliness, right?
is.
It's the client engagement. So I like that performative. Yeah, that's a good idea. um we're going to talk today about some of these social skills groups that you've run, because I think that's so very important. And we have listeners that are speech therapists and BCBAs, but I think a lot of speech therapists are tasked with planning social language groups, and sometimes it can feel hard to know what's, like you said, the hip young cool person that you were planning these groups. So I'm excited for you to share today. So what does your assessment process look like for social language groups, or whatever setting you're in? Like, how do we deem that somebody would be a good candidate for a social language group, I guess, too?
So, I don't use any formal assessments for the groups that I'm involved with at this
Yep.
point. They're usually kids who are being recommended from other levels of service. So my
Mm-hmm.
primary, like my day job is as the director of in-home autism services. In Pennsylvania, we call it IBHS, or Intensive Behavioral Health Services. So I know a lot of the community kind of through my staff, through
Mm-hmm.
working with other agencies and things like that. Um, so when they kind of move through those individual services and then they need something else, there's kind of a lot of group services available, not as many as I wish there were. There always could be more, but and one option is through like an outpatient setting. Which is the way that I run groups, both through the outpatient setting and through the Autism Society. So I meet these individuals, or I kind of get these calls about these individuals who kind of need a next step, kind of a group placement. And so in talking to the families a little bit about their language, and then meeting them is really the key. And again, I don't use a formal assessment, but from having kind of, a little bit of back and forth with them, goofing around with them, joking with them, teasing them a little bit, having them tease me, that really is where I kind of say, okay, I don't think that they're ready for Dungeons and Dragons, but I think that they could do, a social skills group. I think that they could be in our theater group, because, then they don't have to be kind of coming up with what they're going to say. I tell them what they're going to say. So,
Right.
so that's, I don't know if that's the perfect answer, but that's kind of where the majority of my assessment lies, is in meeting them in various group settings and kind of determining where they would fit best from there.
Okay, great. And so I know that you've used Dungeons and Dragons, but it sounds like you maybe are running a variety of different social language groups. So I'd love to know how you got the idea for that. Like, was it one client? Is there something you liked? I mean, when I saw Dungeons and Dragons, when I sleuthed you and I looked up your name, I was like, oh wow. My brothers, who they're older than me, they're like in their 50s and 60s. They play Dungeons and Dragons. And that is like my only experience with even knowing what that is. So I guess for listeners, can you explain what Dungeons and Dragons is? And then how did you get the idea to run a social language group with kind of that as the backbone of it?
Yeah. So Dungeons and Dragons falls under the category of tabletop role-playing games, or TTRPGs. And kind of the hallmark of these role-playing games is that you have one person acting as the dungeon master or game master, who's kind of coordinating the game. So saying, okay, this is where you are. And you've created everyone plays a character that is either similar to themselves or completely unlike themselves. You can make your character to kind of be whatever you want it to be. And in a there's lots of different, role-playing games, but Dungeons and Dragons is set in a fantasy setting where there's elves and dwarves and dragons
Right.
and things like that. So a lot of times people are playing something, very bizarre, like half dragon wizard, right?
Okay.
So you put them in situations and they kind of live this ongoing story. So it's a lot like a board game, except it's cooperative, which there are some board games. I loved, you kind of pointed out, how important it is to have cooperative board games. But Dungeons and Dragons, the players are playing together to create, so they work together, and each quest kind of, goes into the next one. Basically, it's cooperative storytelling is kind of what it boils down to. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of dice involved. So you
Okay.
roll dice to determine if you're successful, and kind of to determine what happens. So the idea for this kind of came from, as I mentioned, I started running social skills groups about probably 18 years ago, I think,
Yeah.
would be my guess. So I was doing the social skills groups, super fantastic. Kids were coming from like 2 hours away to attend these groups, primarily not because I was the greatest in the world, but because they're just not a lot of them, right? So people coming from kind of far away, and they were going really well, meeting once a week for an hour, seeing a lot of progress. And at one point I had this idea, well, I have this theater background. Let's do theater groups. Let's see how that works, right? So the idea was they would audition, everybody would get a part, of course. And then we would rehearse for a few weeks, and then we would put on a play, with the hopes that they could generalize that to schools or community theater, things like that. And over time, that evolved. Originally, we were doing the Christmas Carol. We would do that each year, and I would kind of like tailor it to, the kids in the group. And one year, I can't remember why, but I said, you know what, why don't you guys pick characters and and I'll write a play about those characters.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it very quickly spiraled kind of out of control, but into this beautiful kind of thing
Hmm.
where, the kids were choosing their favorite characters, oftentimes like their intense interest, right?
Right.
And so it's a lot easier to take another perspective when it's your preferred perspective, right?
Hmm.
So the motivation was baked right into it. They were having fun. And so we do this twice a year now. I do one with teens and one with adults because they've, the kids that I
Yeah.
work with, they've all grown up. And super successful. And somewhere in the middle of that, I said, the next step to this is for them to do improv, right?
Yeah.
Because life is improvisational, like
Yeah.
there's no script for what we're doing right now. If you meet someone on the street, it's all.
Mhm.
So I said, well, I hate improv. It's terrifying,
Yeah.
and it makes me nervous. So if it makes me nervous, it's certainly going to make these adults and teens and younger people that I work with nervous. So I said, boy, what can I do? And I played Dungeons and Dragons since I was 6 years old,
Okay.
long time ago. So I said, oh my gosh, there are people out there doing therapeutic D&D groups,
Yeah.
and Dungeons and Dragons is improvisational.
Yeah.
So I put it out to some of the people that I worked with as like a pilot, like an 8-week kind of thing. I ended up with 14 people
Wow.
in the group,
Yeah.
and which is way too many people for a table, but we figured it out. And at the end, the feedback was, can we keep doing this?
Hmm.
And can it be longer? Right. So we were
Mm.
only meeting for an hour. And I was seeing them progress like from week to week, as opposed to
Hmm.
like usually we see kids progress over months or years
Yeah.
sometimes, right? And
Hmm.
I was seeing their, all these skills kind of being noticeably different in between times seeing them. So that was kind of the origin of it. I still do all those, I still do theater groups. I still
Oh, you
do kind
do.
of more, I'll say more classic format social skills groups, but
Mhm.
I don't consider them to be, just kind of typical social skills groups. We have a lot of
Right.
fun. We shoot each other with Nerf guns. They throw cheese balls at my face. So
Well, it's what I love about it is it's out of the box thinking, which I have always done. And I worked for 10 years in a middle school, high school, and my background is school-based and non-public programs or ABA centers. And I've always had to be just a different thinker. Like this kid is social, but they're not yet speaking. Like how are we going to harness that motivation to find happiness and joy around others in different ways? So I think like this episode, I hope it inspires people to just think outside of the box. I remember one time, I talk about this in a training, but I had this teacher who, nice person, but I had this idea for the kids. She didn't get it, but I think this is a fun activity. We had this beautiful high school library, and I was like, why don't we, for social group, we'll walk down to the library, and then everybody will pick a magazine that they really like, and then we'll sit around in a circle and we'll look at them. And it was like, I felt like I really had to go on a limb to suggest that because it would have been easier for me to be like, okay, our skill of the week is discussing a non-preferred topic. It's called small talk. We all do it. I still do those kind of, I think small talk is important for work and stuff, but I definitely felt nervous kind of going on a limb and saying, this is what I thought we should do.
yeah.
Now I could care less. It's having an online business. I don't care what anybody thinks of me. I'm calloused and dead inside. But back then, I was nervous because I was like, no, you don't get it. Like we're walking together down to the library. People are showing each other things. And the thing with kids who are not yet speaking, which is kind of the majority of what I talk about, it's a lot of times we're just standing around and we may not necessarily, especially teens, they might be on their phone, they check Snapchat, they show it to somebody else. It's not always, my big thing is like, please don't make kids say my turn, your turn when you're playing games because nobody really says those things. But it's easier for us to default to that rote learning. And what you're doing is bold. What you're doing is outside of the box thinking. So I hope that people that are listening do it. do that activity that you are thinking about, because every environment is different, right? You're using your background, what you see with the kids that you're working with and now adults. And what I think is so cool too about the theater groups is not only for the kids to have that experience, but for the parents,
Yes.
because for that to be an opportunity, I work with people from all over the world, literally, who just can't even find a speech therapist who understands autism. And for the people living by Rob, you are lucky because not everybody has that type of offering. You could get your rote social language skills group, which that might be great for somebody, but to have something that is more of like a life experience, which is what you're providing for people, I just think that is so amazing. You're doing great work, Rob.
Thanks.
What skills can you address? You said making progress, because that's the truth too. Like like if you're seeing a kid for a traditional like once a week pull out for speech therapy or going into the group, sometimes it's hard to see that growth. But what you're doing is like more of a cooperative activity. So I guess what types of skills can you address while engaged in these activities?
Yeah. My silly answer would be, what kind of skills can you not address in
Yeah.
this kind of?
Ooh, I
So
like it.
it's really amazing. So initially you see things like tone and the prosody and just kind of that they just sound more more fluent.
Mhm.
So they're coming into my groups with kind of full language in most cases,
Yeah.
but their actual social communication is still, it's not fantastic.
Right.
They're the kind of differences are pretty marked. So they kind of build that, and I love that you brought up this kind of typical idea of like my turn, your turn. Let's and there's and a lot of times you have to start with that. You play the games where you flip the card, or when it's my turn, and that's a great place to start. But real conversation is among groups of people is not your turn, my turn. It's
Mhm.
kind of finding your moment to get in. And Dungeons and Dragons is really cool because there's kind of two parts of the game. So there's when you're in like combat, so when you're like in a battle, that is turn-based, right? So, but even then, there are times where you can kind of like give suggestions or things off your turn. But the rest of the time, which is probably depending on who you're playing with, the majority of the time, you're in this more story driven kind of element, the kind of role playing section where you're in a tavern in a town, or you're in the woods talking to a group of centaurs or whatever it might be. And there aren't turns at that point. Sometimes I will, there's a lot of modifications they'll put in, but
Mhm.
sometimes I will kind of add turns to that just to make sure everybody gets a voice. But most of the time it's very, kind of feeling out where they're going to talk. And I'll, use some prompting in there and say, hey, what do you think? Or I'll use the characters, that's where the characters have different voices and things like
Mhm.
that. So that's the characters will say, oh, what do you think, Rose? Like, so you can really kind of shape that. So they're kind of bringing that out. But, you see things like initiation kind of rise,
Mhm.
they're just kind of affect is different. The social interaction is just baked into it. You have to do
Mhm.
it, and it's kind of easier because you're doing it as a character instead of
Mhm.
yourself.
Yeah.
So you kind of get that, the consequences are yours but not directly. So we'll try to work things in like, oh, they're having a hard time making friends, or they're having a hard time asking someone out. Like, well, let's
Mhm.
put it in the game.
Mhm.
Let's
Right.
play through that in the game and see how it works out. Because if the girl says no in the game, no big deal, right? But you got some practice in there. And then the last one I would just say is just kind of, it gives them this connection point.
Yeah.
Because Dungeons and Dragons has become this huge force right
Mhm.
now. Like, a lot of people are playing role-playing games. Stranger Things kind of brought it to
Right.
light. There's a live show called Critical Role that's streamed, that's hugely popular. So like it's at the forefront of pop culture right now,
Mhm.
which, when I started playing until not that long ago, it was something you didn't tell people about,
Right.
but
It's hush
it's
hush.
right, absolutely. It's, oh yeah, what's that? I don't, it's so, but now it's cool.
Hmm.
And like 90% of the individuals that have come through my groups are playing, in addition to the group, they're
Mm.
playing with friends, they're playing at school, they're playing at their local comic book store, they're playing
Mm.
online. So
Mhm.
it's given them this thing that
Mhm.
they can be interested in, connect to other people with, that they didn't have before. So
Right.
yeah, it's cool.
I love that. I was wondering if Stranger Things, I'm a big fan of Stranger Things. I didn't watch the last two episodes. I need to. They were so long. I just couldn't. I need to do that. But love it. I've seen every other episode. And I was remembering, like, was that something that they played in Stranger Things? Okay. Yeah. That's
Right,
coming back for
right
one more
away
season,
in
right?
episode one, they're
Okay,
playing.
that's right. Because I remember my brothers played it, and then I was like, Stranger Things. I love this show. It is coming back for one more season, isn't
It
it?
is.
Stranger Things. Okay.
It
Yes. Okay.
is.
I've got some
Sometime
time.
in 2025 is.
Okay, good. I've got some time to watch those last two episodes. Oh, interesting. Okay, I love this. So how can other people, if they're thinking about starting like even like a theater group or Dungeons and Dragons, if they have some like a little voice in their head that says, I'm being called to do this, and I love what Rob did. I mean, like I hate when people say they're thought leaders. I hate when people put that on their own LinkedIn, but you're definitely a thought leader because this is just very outside of the box, which I really resonates with me. And sometimes for people, depending on who you are, it's hard for people to say, like, okay, I'm going to go into this classroom and we're going to do something totally different because people will have opinions and you just have to stay strong and keep the vision because this is good stuff. How can people get started, do you think? What are some like baby steps to getting started to something kind of outside the box like this?
So I think you really, like you said, like you really want to lead with the joy. So find a sponsor, like not even like monetarily, although certainly that would help, right? But find someone who shares this joy that you
Yeah.
have, and go to them with this excitement. And I was so nervous about pitching this to my supervisor at the time. I was like, oh, she's gonna think it's weird. The parents are gonna think it's weird. I wrote this whole like note letter to the parents saying like this isn't a cult. It's
Right, right.
it's because I remember like the when it was really associated with like satanic kind of worship, and that's not
Right,
was never the case. But
right,
but my boss was like, absolutely,
right.
let's start right away. And the families were like, yep, I played it when I was younger.
Oh,
Let's do it. So
that's neat.
I think finding someone who shares that kind of joy with you is a good step. Then from there, determining kind of what venue will work best. So like
Mm-hmm,
doing it through outpatient has been really successful for me.
mm-hmm,
Coming from the ABA world, it's a lot harder for us to bill
mm-hmm.
things like group, you
Yeah,
know.
right.
Uh, they make it real difficult and they really make it time limited. And
Mm-hmm,
our individuals need some time to figure things out.
mm-hmm,
Um, and just to feel that sense of community.
mm-hmm.
So finding that, our local Autism Society chapter has just been absolutely wonderful. They've really, anytime I have an idea, they say, "Yep, let's figure it out." So I've done a
Right.
lot through that. Specifically for D&D, there's a lot of resources out there. There's Game to Grow, there's Geek Therapeutics, there's TTRPG Kids. They all have courses. Some of them have certifications. I would also recommend. I've got it right here to show you. So this is by Dr. Megan Connell.
Oh,
So this
lovely.
one. It would be like a great place to start the tabletop role playing therapy
Hmm.
book. But really what to do D&D, what you need is someone who's familiar with therapy and someone who's familiar with Dungeons and Dragons. And that's really all you need. Maybe that's the same person. In my case, that I
Mm-hmm.
I, I knew both things. So again, it's really finding someone who will latch on to your idea and finding a way to I ran groups kind of independently for a long time where people were paying kind of out of pocket, which I don't love. We have insurance for a reason, right? So as quickly as I could, I kind of moved into that forum. But if you need to start with having people pay for it, we have to pay for everything, right? You have to pay for your kid to be on a sports team. You have to pay for your kid to, join, ballet or whatever it might be. If they need to pay a little bit so they can have this amazing social experience, that's a good place to start too. So again, I love what you said. Like, if you have that idea and you know that it will motivate people, find a way. It's there.
Yeah, I love that. Where can people find out more about you and your work? Do you have a website or anything like that?
So I don't have like a website, but I do have my Instagram, which is Therapeutic Dungeon Master. So you can kind of follow that and message me on there. And then I also have a YouTube channel, which it's public, but I haven't talked about it too much, but I have a lot of videos on there for my regular kind of social skills groups.
Yeah.
Where they're not really video modeling kind of, but it's more like kind of discrimination training. So they're kind of like, if you've heard of like the cool or not cool kind of style. So the teens that are watching them, they have to determine like, okay, was that a good example or a bad example, and kind of why. There's all different examples on there. But that's Make ABA Fun. That's the kind of name of that YouTube channel. So there's all kinds of stuff on there as well. But
Awesome.
I'd love if people wanted to, message me through Instagram. I'd be happy to kind of give people advice. I've kind of set up Zooms with people before to just kind of, give them ideas or get them running. So, I'd be more than happy to help anybody.
Amazing. That sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was just a delight to hear about all the great work you're doing.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to talk to you, Rose. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.